So we are at the last talk of today for this session. The next speaker is Martin Herzmann. He is from Kumovis, that is a startup based in Munich. And he will talk about application-specific software supporting engineers and physicians to make risk in 3D printing. So Martin, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, for the introduction. My title, Application-Specific Software Supporting Engineers and Physicians to Manage the Risk in 3D Printing. We are Kumovis, and my name is Martin Herzmann. I work for business development, and Kumovis is a company once started as a printer manufacturer in 2017, only for medical 3D printing, dedicated on medical 3D printing, serving both point of care, hospitals, and medtech industry. The company founders are backed up with knowledge about the hardware and the software, which is the core of this presentation. Clinical know-how with a deep understanding of the clinical know-how, and material competence and material science. So we grew up 2017 when the MDR was released, and in the last years we really understood and embraced this change of MDR and understood the market demand, which is today visible when we talk about 3D printing in medicine. So the market demands qualified machines. The market currently lacks validated processes. Processes usually are a black box once you would like to look into those. There are medical grade materials, but the market still lacks medical grade materials with a proper documentation of biocompatibility for some applications, and a proper documentation, seamless documentation of the whole production process. And the whole production process, you have probably seen this workflow in iconic easiness. So you start with imaging, with anatomical imaging, do the segmentation if you talk about patient-specific implants or patient-specific devices, and transfer this segmented anatomy into a design of an implant of a medical device. For serial production, for medical serial production, you start with this design or the CAD file, which is then uploaded into the 3D printer. And explicitly would like to say it's a 3D printer, but the process behind is 3D printing, which covers more than the hardware. You need to document what you have done and what you will be doing, and finally have your final product in hands, in the best case in the patient or at the patient. So the core is the printer itself and the printing process behind, but let me start with the qualified machines. What does Kumovis do to qualify these machines with the installation? So with every installation Kumovis takes place, we come with a set of parameters and print jobs per material. These are not patient specific or not customer parts. These are test parts such as tensile bars, dog bones, density analysis blocks for CT scans, so that we can specify on the material that we fulfill a machine qualification, no matter which part we print afterwards. So we can ensure the reproducibility quality of the complete build platform, not only in parts of that build platform, can document this, for example, on homogeneous crystallinity, which is crucial for polymer printing, etc., etc. So what we are talking here is only about the machine qualification. The part of the customer, the specific part of the customer, does not yet play a role. And we do this per material, because this is key if we talk about the materials. The whole process of 3D printing, the material which we use are polymers ranging from PEEK, which is known and accepted from either milling or injection molding, to PEC, which is an interesting polymer as well, to PPSU. And the processes behind that manufacturing of those filaments must be wisely understood, because if you take a look at the material qualification is a key component in the whole risk management as well. And looking into the norms, the ISO norm 10993-18 talks about the chemical characterization, which means talking about medically released filaments. There are some in the market which can be bought commercially as filaments, but if you talk about specific filaments, You as a medical provider, medical device provider, let it be the hospital or let it be a medical device company, must be able to prove that the chemical characterization coming from the raw material into the filament and finally into a medical device has the same material properties, has the same chemical consistency, etc. So this document is provided by Kumovis with every installation to talk about the material qualification according to the ISO norm. And if you see -18, there are way more. I believe it's 20 subchapters. And please make sure that these applicable subchapters are checked once we talk about medically released materials. So this was one step into the material qualification. Coming back into the machine qualification per material, let me take mechanical stress test as an example. And here we take in the machine qualification on our tensile bars, on our test parts, we verify that we fulfill specifications which are set by norms, let it be ISO or other norms, so that you can see with PEC, with PPSU, or with PEAK, we do fulfill properties which are known from injection molding and always exceed this yield point, which means the machine itself, because we talk about machine qualification, is able to produce a medical part according to material specifications which are accepted in the industry as standards. Talking about standards, this is used for serial production, and those serial production must rely on norms. 3D printing offers the beauty of freedom of design, which means we talk a lot about patient-specific implants. And if we talk about patient-specific implants, let it be cutting guides, let it be implants, let it be other applicators, we talk about sometimes individual criteria which come on top of those norms. So those individual criteria, I would like to give you an example on this patient-specific cranial plate. Patient-specific cranial plate, in this case printed out of PEC, guides us to the part qualification, because what we do now as Kumovis during the installation, we take a look not as on standard parts, but on the specific parts defined by the customer. So together with the customer, in cooperation with the customer, we define parameters, part parameters, such as the impact, such as mechanical properties, the strength, crystallinity, etc. And sometimes we rely on norms, sometimes rely in regards to impact and a cranial plate, for example, on bone density equivalence, where we take a look at the literature, etc. So those norms or those parameters are defined in cooperation with the customers. And understanding the bandwidth of the part parameters, of the part which are printed, which are supposed to be printed on the machine which has been qualified. We talk about the part qualification we define by understanding the portfolio range, minimum and maximum thresholds. And knowing those thresholds allows us to define a bandwidth. And within this bandwidth, we are able to qualify then the part. And those part qualification parameters help us to define process parameters. And those process parameters come back to the machine, such as the nozzle diameter, such as layer thickness, which all have an impact on stability, on print speed, on different parameters. In regards to temperature management, I would like to have a little deeper look. Temperature management is key, because temperature management for high performance polymer is one crucial and one key component. In this case, which I show you here, we have defined a mechanical property and a geometry and are able to peel off the support material without any tool, because we have defined in cooperation with the customer the shape and the size and the thickness of this print bed of this part. And by doing so, we are able to bend the part, the final medical device part, and can peel off this support plate which is laying underneath this part without any tools. But this needs to be defined in cooperation with the customer to allow, with smart temperature management, for example, ease of use once we talk about medical production in filament printing. Coming back to the part, to the patient-specific part, the patient-specific part can be, for example, checked with geometrical tolerances. What you see here is the part itself, how it comes with the support structures out of the printer as a natural part. The support structures are removed then, and then we perform an optical scan to compare the geometrical tolerances and accuracy. And once we meet those parameters in cooperation with the customer and with the part and with the bandwidth, we can define with these critical process parameters back the process validation on the machine. Because now we close the loop and come back to the machine itself. Because the machine itself has 21 sensors included, and those 21 sensors are reporting data to Kumovis plant, and that's kind of the key software which allows you to back up your machine, your material, your part, your processes, because what we do in here, we define together with the customer in his quality management system a timeline how often we do measure humidity, temperature management, bed leveling, temperature in the build plate, temperature on the nozzle, etc., material forwarding, etc. And those parameters, those sensors report all those critical parameters defined in that process validation into the Kumovis plant software. And by doing so, we have the chance to really cover the whole value chain with the validation of the process, which is key, the qualification of the machine, and the documentation, the qualification of the material and the documentation properly. In regards to the materials, if you talk about PEAK, which is commercially available, but there are further materials which Kumovis will bring into the market. We talk about specific patients, customer-specific materials, PPSU, PEC, PEI, and resorbable materials, you name it. So there is a broad range of, I would say, more than 10 materials available, which is available as a filament. We are able to cover with one software as a key component in the printer the whole value chain. Still, our customers do not necessarily only rely on this software. For example, the final product is only released after an optical check, for example. So if you see coloring, if you see a haptical criteria, so there is the human factor as well. Once we talk about the releasing the part, because there's the human factor absolutely as well. So in a nutshell, the application-specific software Kumovis plant is able to support the engineers who are probably well aware of validation, qualification of processes, of materials, but also physicians. And Kumovis plant makes point-of-care printing one step easier as we back up the decision whether this part may become a medical device by software tools, which are then have been validated and qualified by the user itself. So we can transfer the risk, manage the risk of 3D printing in healthcare. Have we finalized that product? I think a software never is finalized. So what do we need in future to continue improving Kumovis plant? Well, additional device designs for sure for further clinical applications, because currently we are able to cover cranial plates, like you saw, spinal applications. However, there are further applications which you have seen over the last hours and days, or will see in future, which are applicable for 3D printing as well. For that reasons, further clinical applications are interesting, further designs are interesting, plus additional parameters, because every customer probably has a different quality management with different quality parameters he defines and sets as a benchmark, which means the parameters I was able to show you during this 15 minutes certainly have set the fundament, but there will be patient-specific, customer-specific, medical device-specific parameters for that detailed understanding of clinical requirements. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Martin, for your very nice talk. And we are open now for questions. So if you have any question, please use the window on the right of the screen. And we have some minutes to discuss about your talk. I was impressed by the number of sensors you have inside the machine. So 21 sensors is a very high number. I don't know if all these sensors could be managed by the user. My concern is how to find the right balance between number of information and ease of use of the machine, because this could be an issue or not.
It can be an issue depending on the parameters. I believe once we open the interface for the users to our sensor database, it would be overwhelming. Fully agreed. However, we have multiple sensors, for example, for the homogeneous temperature management. If we talk about temperature management, we have a built room, which is a building plate, which allows you to print 22 centimeters in a cylindric way, which means we have multiple heat sensors only in the build chamber itself. And those sensors are not to be steered and controlled by the user, but those come along with the printer as standard, which means sometimes those sensors are necessary for your part, and sometimes they are simply not necessary. Depending on the plate which you saw, the plate is a very, very thin part, a very shallow part. We've talking about cranial plates, so they can be up to 15 centimeters. So depending on those, some sensors might not make sense. However, they come with a printer because the printer comes with this freedom of design. So those 21 sensors must not be maintained by customers, must not be maintained by the user of the printer, but are included in the system itself, whether you need this information or whether this is just data for you, up to the application, up to the material, and up to the user and the quality management behind.
Yeah, sure. Just for curiosity, your history is, so you have a background in academia, or you start to develop this machine by some other experience in industrial field? So how did you start to do these developments?
So myself, I do have a background in medtech, I would say 20 years in medtech, but the founders of Kumovis come as a spin-off of the Technical University of Munich. So they are backed up with as medical engineers, with material science, with machine engineering. So those are kind of combination of medical, material, and machining. Those three components made the plan to design a printer dedicated for medical 3D printing, as the founders saw a lot of 3D printers which also can be used for medical, but not necessarily dedicated for medical. So in regards to the surface to clean, in regards to this regulated market, from scratch on, from hour zero on, it was the goal to have a proper documentation, to have proper surfaces for cleaning, and to run materials which are medical grade, such as PEEK as the first material we were able to proceed. However, currently Kumovis is growing fast, so further competencies did grow into material science, into processing, into software as well, because this all plays a role. Once you talk about only hardware as a printer, this is certainly not necessary, not enough, and you have to enlarge your portfolio. So currently we have something around a little more than 20 employees working in Munich.
There is a question from Mr. Herman Seitz. He wants to know if, in addition to your current 3D printer, do you plan to establish more 3D printers based on other processes, or you plan to stay on this process?
Well, depending on planning or wishing. So I would say priorities. And as I mentioned, we just have exceeded the quantity of 20 employees and 20 colleagues. We probably face the challenge of setting the right priorities. For that reason, we focus on filament printing, we focus on polymer printing, and we focus on medical. And with these three building blocks, we raise and we scale the market. Okay. History will tell when Kumovis is growing in which area, but so far it is not a strategic component to grow into aerospace or to grow into other manufacturing methods. Filament printing is very smart in our perspective, as the entrance barrier is quite low, which means filament printing and the filament feeding can be done by a non-engineer, I would say. So there's a filament cabinet. Once you close it, it's flooded with dry air to make sure the filament stays safe. And the rest kind of happens automatically, while powder handling, resin handling is way more complex. So to access this point of care printing, filament printing in our eyes has the biggest beauty.
Good. So there are no other questions. So our time is finished. So I want to thank you again for your nice presentation, and thanks all the other speakers.